We better get started as we have an exciting action-packed agenda. So I'm going to ask Sarah to go to the next slide.
It's actually Rachel now.
No problem. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Charlotte Bergin, here from the Interagency Network for Education in Emergency, and moderating our webinar here today, focusing on learning through play during COVID-19. Just a quick reminder that this webinar is part of a series of webinars we have been doing during the global pandemic as an opportunity just to bring colleagues in the sector together in these complex times to share tools, resources, practical strategies, and just to learn together and from one another. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like to see any of the recordings of previous webinars, you can find those on the website. You can also find webinars in other languages, in French, Spanish, Arabic and Portuguese, also on the website. You'll also find other tools and resources, including those mentioned today, in our COVID-19 resource collection, along with other advocacy and technical tools. So please do take a look at the website. Our director, Dean Brooks, director of INEE, isn't with us today, but he did want me to pass on his welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us, and also wanted me to again just recognise the incredible commitment and dedication of the Education in Emergencies community at this time. It's been an incredibly challenging and complex few months, and just really recognise all of the work you're all doing to continue education always, but particularly in these complex times. So a welcome from him. But let's focus on our topic today. We are looking at learning through play during COVID-19, and we have a brilliant range of speakers with us covering that topic in different locations and from different perspectives. So a huge thanks to them for being with us today. And thanks also to my INEE colleagues behind the scenes who have done so much to pull this together. It's such an important topic. It has come up in other webinars. You may have been on our ECD webinar a few weeks ago, or on our psychosocial support and social emotional learning webinar several months ago now, and where this came up a lot. We're really excited to be able to dedicate a full 90 minutes together to this, as we know it's really important to INEE members around the world. Before we get started, let me just review the agenda. I do want to hand over quickly to the speakers so we have time for them all, but just a quick run through. Rachel, if you don't mind going to the next slide, thank you. We're going to start by hearing from Paul Frizzoli from the LEGO Foundation, who's going to really help us with an overview of core concepts around learning through play and really help us situate this discussion, which will be a really great start for us today. So thanks to Paul. And then we're going to hear a range of really practical examples of what this is looking like. We're going to hear about Play Matters at Home work from Hadija Nandiose from IRC, and then radio learning through play from Amani Mkamba from Ubongo. So thank you both for sharing your work with us. I'll then hand over to Gustavo Pean from DAI Global. I'm not going to pronounce your work. You can do that for us, because I'm sure my pronunciation won't be right, but really excited to hear about your work there. And then followed by Lawrence Afay from Right to Play and the work around teacher training and learning through play. And last but not least, we'll hand over to Brian McCormack from Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow to talk about psychosocial support and human rights and the work he's doing there. So a huge thanks to all the panelists, a great range with us today. And then we'll protect that last 30 minutes for that question and answer session. So just a reminder to please submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But I really want to give the floor to our fantastic speakers. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to Paul. Paul, you might have heard Paul on previous webinars. Paul's been doing so much to champion interagency collaboration always, but particularly at this time. So really grateful for you joining us today, Paul, and for sharing more about the work you're doing for LEGO and more broadly around play in the sector. So thanks, Paul.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, my name is Paul Frizzoli. I'm a senior program specialist at the LEGO Foundation. And today I'm going to talk to folks. We're going to try to set the scene on what we mean by learning through play here at the LEGO Foundation. Usually this is a session we do over the course of a day where we're playing all day. So I've got 10 minutes to pack in what we mean by learning through play on a webinar. So hey, we're being flexible. But we're going to talk about what we mean by learning through play. If you go to the next slide, why are we talking about play here at the LEGO Foundation? We're going to walk through that really quickly together. But our aim at the foundation is to redefine what we mean by play and how people think about play. And then we also aim to reimagine learning to include play as part of the definition of learning. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'll explain a little bit more. When you look at the definition of play on Google, for example, you'll see these are the types of words that pop up as that defines play. That play is something that is for enjoyment or just recreation, but play is not serious, it's not practical, it's not something that we can use in our daily lives. And for us, if you go to the next slide, we really believe that play needs help, because play, we think, and we've seen from research and from the different types of programs that we fund and that we implement, that play really is the cornerstone of learning. And what I thought we would do is that we together experience why play is important on this webinar. So if we go to the next slide, what I'm going to ask you to do, and Charlotte and other colleagues have asked you to do, but find some simple materials. So it could be bricks, it could be tape, if you have some paper around, or scissors. You might have some cute little objects. It could be a coffee cup. It could be some fruit. Anything that you have around. Over the next minute, if you could just find whatever's around you. Don't really look too far, because I'm pretty confident that you'll be able to play with the objects that you have found. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Then we're going to do an activity together. And while you're looking for your objects, I'm just going to ask if we can go to the next slide. And if you could just triple click. Great. Or double click. That's great. Oh, oops, sorry. Yeah, I just needed all the text. Perfect. So I'll give you about 30 more seconds. I know this is very accelerated timeline. I want to make sure that we can talk about what we mean by learning through play and why it's important. And then we can hear from the colleagues who are also on this webinar to learn more what that looks like, the types of play that they've been engaging in, and also the different types of activities and resources that they have, so that at the end of this session, you feel like as participants, you understand what we mean by learning through play, as well as having resources and tools and tips to implement different types of learning through play, whether that be at the home or whether that be in distance learning opportunities, or whether that be in schools. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, I think our time is up. I'm going to ask you to think of a playful childhood memory, or a memory from your childhood of a playful experience. So this is something, when you think of your childhood, it could be like a very playful experience that you really remember. So it could be something you would do over the summer as a child or as a kid, or this is something that you would do with your family or your parents or with your siblings. So think of a playful childhood experience. And then what I want you to do is build that model. It doesn't have to be a perfect representation of what that childhood experience is, but I want you to take 3 minutes to build a model that represents that playful childhood experience. And while you're building that model, I want you to think about, like, what are the different characteristics that pop up that made that playful for you? What are the different elements that made that playful? So you have 3 minutes now to create that model of a playful childhood experience and thinking of the different characteristics of what that meant for you. So get to it, and I'm going to get to it as well. And there's no right way to do this. So you're just building your model of a playful childhood experience with anything that's around you. And it can be abstract or it can be very literal. It's really up to you. you've got about 1 minute and 30 seconds left. I know this is so quick. You can finish your model later too, if you don't finish it after the full 3 minutes. All right, you have 1 minute left. Thirty seconds. Okay, you've got 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so what we're gonna do now, I know you're probably all not done, but we're gonna move on. You can finish your model while you're listening also to the rest of the webinar, or while you're listening to me. If we could go to the next slide. I want you in the chat, while I'm kind of presenting my model, I want you to share some of the characteristics of your playful experience. So you don't have to share what your experience was, but just share some of the characteristics of what made it playful for you. And if you want to share it, like I see somebody, Anna Marty, just shared their experience, you can do that too. So I'm going to share mine really quickly. So when I was a kid, I used to like to build forts from like different things that were in my family room. So it could be blankets or whatnot. And so this is my couch. This is the couch that was in my family room. And I built a little tent, and it's got a cute little flag on it. And this is actually the coffee table. And me and my sisters used to build forts together. And we would pretend the floor was like hot lava. And we'd have to figure out ways, really creative ways, to get from the coffee table to the couch, for example. And we created our own little special world where we created the world, and then we interacted in the world and tried to come up with games and activities that we could do together, just out of stuff that was at home. So that was an example of my playful childhood memory. And I imagine, as I'm seeing here, I'm seeing people talk about other characteristics that are around like imagination and discovery, about taking risks and having fun, about exploring. So many things popping up, where you have the freedom to be creative, active and imaginative, joyful. Let's go to the next slide, because this is what we mean by learning through play. So for us at the foundation in LEGO, we believe that learning through play you have to experience these 5 characteristics of play. So play has to be actively engaging. You have to be involved and part of play. It has to be socially interactive. In many ways, play involves other people. And if there's a playful experience where you're an individual, you might be then involving other people after the playful experience. It has to be meaningful. So it has to give meaning, has to be based on children and even adults' own experiences and what's real to them right now. It has to be iterative, where you're testing things out, trying things out, learning through the process. It also has to be joyful. And when we say joyful, that we don't necessarily mean that play has to be fun. It could also be challenging and really difficult to work through an activity. And then while you work through it and you learn, and that's a joyful process as well. So for us, these are the major characteristics of what we mean by learning through play. If you go to the next slide, I'd like for you to tell us, tell us a little bit what you think kind of the types of skills that get built when you are engaging in learning through play. So for example, in my model, it was very socially engaging. I was talking about playing with my sisters. It was very joyful. We were creating our own world. It was very actively engaged because we built the world ourselves and then we created the games. Those are the characteristics of learning through play, but what do you think are the different types of skills that can be built when you play? So I'm seeing things like negotiation skills, creativity, problem solving, social skills, communication skills. Yes. So if you go to the next slide, for us, when we talk about learning through play, that helps to build a whole range of skills. And while I was building my model and thinking about my playful childhood experience, there are different skills like executive function skills that I needed to actually create my model, such as visual perception skills, perspective taking, assessing my model, seeing if I was doing it right and iterating. Also, that supported my spatial abilities. With my fine motor skills, I was building things with my hands. I was trying to put together my model and my story and supporting my short-term memory development while I was putting that together and trying to remember what I was putting together. And as well as cognitive flexibility, as new ideas were coming into my head while I was building my model, I was processing those as well. It also involves skills like self-regulation and symbolic representation. So play is serious. Play helps us develop really, really important skills that support our cognitive, social, and emotional and creative skills. So if you go to the next slide, and this is really one of the last things I want to leave us with in terms of what we mean by learning through play, and I know I need to go. If you just go to the next slide, play really develops these 5 skills. They develop children and adults' creative, social, emotional, cognitive, and physical skills. So this is why we think play needs help. That the definition of play needs to be redefined and the definition of learning needs to be reimagined because of how important play can be in a child and an adult's life. I'm gonna stop there. If we just go to the next slide. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for participating in that play activity. I have a hyperlink in the slide where you can go to a whole playlist that we've been developing at the foundation, which includes different resources, including some of the partners on this call, of different play activities that you can do in home or at school. And I'm gonna leave it there and thank you very much. Happy to answer questions too about our understanding of play and the different work of the LEGO Foundation at the end.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, certainly got me thinking very differently about play, and just looking at the chat, it's so great to see everyone connecting on this and sharing those experiences. Yeah, I think really brought it to the forefront of our minds as we now move into some of these really practical examples of how people are programming with learning through play. So thanks for starting us off in such a creative way. Brilliant. I'm going to hand over to our first practical example where we'll hear more about the Play Matters Consortium and Play Matters at Home in particular. So I'd like to ask Khadija. Khadija's connection may be a little weak, so her video won't be on, and Julia as well, Julia Fraser from IRC. Thank you both so much for being with us today and for sharing your work. Over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm Julia Fraser, the Senior Technical Advisor on the Play Matters project. It's a 5-year project looking to improve holistic learning outcomes for refugee and host community children ages 3 to 12 in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Tanzania. It's implemented by a consortium led by the IRC with Plan International, War Child Holland, Innovations for Poverty Action, and the Behavioral Insights team, with the participation of Ubongo for emergency radio programming in response to COVID pandemic, and also with the partnership of the LEGO Foundation. At the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Play Matters team scanned the education responses being planned in each country, and all three were looking at ways to use distance education to continue teaching the curriculum. Play Matters decided to complement that rather than risking duplicating. And so we looked to develop a playful way to support children learning at home and support families more broadly, especially knowing that many of our clients would have limited connectivity. So we knew that the stress of quarantining and distancing was likely to affect refugee families as it had affected our own families. And we decided to focus our response on supporting the well-being of children and their caregivers at home, using play to provide a fun way for families to spend more time together. And you just saw from Paul's presentation the outcomes that we're looking for with learning through play. Our intervention is a short paper booklet with illustrations and minimal text. And you can see some of those illustrations on this slide, and you'll see more on the next slide. We tried to keep the text to a minimum, knowing that we may be working with many families with limited literacy and also language. There were many, many languages spoken. We were able to translate these into about a dozen, but we know that there's a lot more languages people may be familiar with. So I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague Khadija Nanjose to talk about specifically how this worked in the Uganda experience. She is the director of the Play Matters project within the country of Uganda. Over to you, Khadija.
Thank you so much, Julia. My greetings to everyone on the call. Like you've mentioned, Julia, I'll just pick it from there. We in Uganda are taking the learning packets and contributing to other efforts that are going on in the country to see how we continue to support children's learning while they're at home. Maybe before that, can you kindly go to the next slide, Rachel? We are looking at developing over 40,000 booklets. These are going to be distributed in 8 refugee hosting districts. Like Julia did mention, our niche is to see that children continue to learn, but we are doing this learning through play. We intend to reach approximately 60,000 children in pre-primary and primary in these districts. However, we've had to go through a number of processes that are very, very critical to making sure that children access quality materials and benefit from them. I wish to highlight a few. One, we've had to work with government to evaluate the materials, validate them, and make sure that they meet the standards that are in place. We recognize that even though this is an emergency and probably there could be a rush to get materials out to the children, it is also very critical that children get the very best that we can be able to provide under the circumstances. So working with government through the relevant authority, in Uganda, it is the National Curriculum Development Center. We've had opportunity for them to really look at the materials, and the appreciation that they have given us has been around the fact that the materials are simple to use. We have localized the text and the images. Like Julia mentioned, we've made sure that we translate the materials into the local languages where we are going to be distributing the materials. The other important aspect about translation has been the fact that we are also working with community volunteers, and for pre-primary we also have facilitators, community facilitators that support these programs. who may not have very strong background in using English, but are very strong in using their local languages. So the translation is also another way of making sure that these end users are actually able not only to access the materials, but support the caregivers as they do interact with the materials and work with the children. The learning packets are going to be distributed home to home. The distribution is going to be carried out by the volunteers and the educators who know the children and the homes very well. We have worked alongside community leaders in mapping the homes and mobilizing the families, as well as disseminating the information, but also making sure that we are aligning ourselves with the prevailing COVID-19 guidelines and restrictions. So these people are in the community, they are very aware of the guidelines, and they are supporting the different volunteers to adhere and follow these restrictions, as well as access the homes as much as possible. We, as part of the initiative, we have provided these volunteers and teachers with guides, and they receive training on how to use these packets, in addition to some phone credit so that they can be able to call the families. We appreciate that in certain circumstances, it will not be possible for them to reach the families directly face to face, but we are using this as a mechanism to make sure that they continue communicating with the families, hearing from them on how they are interpreting the materials, where they are having difficulties, and then where they feel they are struggling, they use the guides that we have provided and fall back on the training to be able to support the parents. You will recognize that the text and the content in this material is really very simple activities that have been done based on materials that are locally available. And in some cases, the activities don't even need materials. So we are very, very hopeful that the parents and the caregivers can easily work with these activities. We are doing a similar activity in Ethiopia and Tanzania. And as you might see from some of the images, distribution has started happening in some of the locations. In partnership with Ubongo, like Julia mentioned, an audio activity is also planned through local radio stations to supplement the guides for families who can listen at home. But our partners Ubongo will elaborate more on this in their presentation. Thank you so much. I want to hand you back to Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Hadija and Julia, for sharing your work. Yeah, brilliant to see this in practice and link so clearly to what Paul was sharing beforehand. So thank you both. In a sort of very nice segue now, we are going to hear about that audio component and the work of Ubongo. So I'd like to introduce Amani to share that work. Thank you, Amani.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Amani, and I represent learning. So to start with, let me tell you what Ubongo is. Ubongo is a Pan-African social enterprise that creates edutainment for kids in Africa. Ubongo creates educational TV, radio, and other media that helps over 17 million kids across Africa to learn, and these kids to love learning. Ubongo had an opportunity to collaborate with Play Matters to bring this kind of play-based learning program to families through accessible technology like radio. And this program designed specifically for the refugees family and their host communities. Ubongo, we have a lot of experience in creating educational radio content for kids, as well as support material for the caregiver. But during this unique COVID-19 situation, whereby the whole families have been home together, we wanted to design something that really will support, facilitate the caregivers to learn together through play while listening to the radio. We knew And we knew that parents felt like they don't have resources, and some of them were not really confident on what they need to teach their children at home. So Ubongo saw this opportunity to get them to play simple learning games together and also highlight for them like how children learn through those games. Next slide, please. So our radio program basically has 4 segments in terms of the structure. And the first structure basically is the introduction on the relevant message when it comes to COVID-19. Then right after that, it comes the segment about the numeracy and the literacy. Right after that, it comes the mindfulness or the social emotional learning exercise. Then the last part of that, it's a prompt for the further learning and play for the caregiving kids. So this is either a story that we start or the program starts and they have to finish together, or the program will give them the idea and they continue playing once the show is over. And all the program basically activities were linked to the play packets, which basically were distributed to these families. So the program will complement the play packet resources. So I would like to play just a sample of the radio program we produce. And I want you to imagine, if there's any phrases that stand out to you, just imagine how you'll be able to finish that phrase. Hope you'll enjoy it.
I am born to learn. Talk with me, it's me and you and you and me. Play with me, it's me and you and you and me. Succeed with me, it's me and you and you and me. Include me in everything you do, and I'll learn from everything I do with you. My name is Professor Play, and I'm here to help you. Together, we will try to keep your family smiling and learning. And I'm going to take you through some easy, playful learning activities that your family can do together so that you can support your kids to develop skills that will help them succeed in school. La 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 la, play! La 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 la, learn! La 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 la, are you ready to play? Get ready to learn! La 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 la, play! This week, we're going to focus on the topic of our bodies. Did you know that we can use our bodies to help us with math? There are different activities that we can do to help us feel less stressed. Our bodies can help us do that. Now, let's move our focus to our hands and arms. Pretend you are squeezing a whole lemon in your left hand. Squeeze it hard. Try to squeeze all the juice out. Feel the tightness in your hand and arm as you squeeze. Now drop the lemon and relax. Building or finishing a story together as a family is a great way to build children's vocabulary skills. If you have a Play Matters at Home play packet, this is Activity 25. Keep building stories together as a family.
Thank you. So the clip I just played, it's on English based, but we produced the radio shows in 4 different languages, which is in Kiswahili, Kinyamwezi, we have in Juba Arabic, and also we have in English. And specifically, we produced this for Tanzania and Uganda. But also we are working with WizKids Workshops, Children Media Organization, which is based in Ethiopia, to adapt the program into other 4 languages for the families in Ethiopia, refugee camps. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have been able to get feedback from the radio show we have been producing from the small number of refugees families. And also just we completed some telephone surveys with families across Tanzania and Uganda, asking more generally how our play-based learning edutainment has supported them during this COVID-19 season. And the feedback we got, we incorporated it into the next episode so that we make it better for our listeners. So there's some few key lessons which we learned along into producing this radio program, and I'd like to share with you. One of them is be very clear in communication. We have to make it clear if the message is for kids, for caregivers, or for both. The second thing we learned is our audience, the people we are literally taking the instructions we are giving to them. For example, when we told them to squeeze their hands, squeeze the lemon in their hands, many say they couldn't do it because they did not have lemon to squeeze. So we had to really be clear to emphasize on the imaginative and pretend play, that it's not that they have to squeeze a lemon, but they can use anything around them, or they can just squeeze their hand and imagine that they're squeezing something in their hand. Also, something we learned is with the games that we shared, which had different variation, that it's important to get them to understand how they can change it. Example, we share the game about the animals or different things. It was important that we empowered the caregiver to be creative so that they don't have to use, or they don't have to do exactly games which we introduce to them. We have to empower them, encourage them to be creative in their different games and looks what's around them and what's it's relatable to their culture or to the environment. Also, something we learned, it's about culture when it comes to activity and words. You have to be really know the culture of your audience. Example, words mean different things in different cultures, and some words don't go over, doesn't mean the same thing to a different culture. Example, in the words play, translating it into Swahili, then, or the Juba Arabic language, we have to use different words and we have to explain what we mean, so for them to get specific words to use in that radio program for specific communities. So learning all those things when it comes to the play matters at home, we think that radio is a really powerful platform, and it needs like a lot of research, and it needs a lot of inclusive and understanding who your audience are, and also to take into consideration the culture aspect of it when it comes to creating content in order to reach your audience effectively. So hope you had fun, and please write down, if you listen to the segment I shared, how did you finish the statement, any statement which pop-ups to you? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amani. I'm sure, like others, I just wanted to keep listening. It was great to hear the example there. Also, really appreciate you sharing the lessons learned. We know that many INEE members have been grappling with distance education at this time, and radio programming particularly, so appreciate you sharing that. I'm now going to hand over to our next speaker, Gustavo Pian, who will share another practical example, this time focusing on health and psychosocial wellness games and activities at this time. So over to you, Gustavo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was a great presentation by Paul and Amani. Thank you very much for setting the scene. And thank you, INEE, for the invitation. My name is Gustavo Payan. I'm the Deputy Chief of Party of the USAID Asegurando la Educación project in Honduras, implemented by DAI Global. So I'll talk about Aprender Jugando, which is a package of games developed by Right to Play Global and adapted for Honduras by my project. So I'll take a minute, next slide, please. I'll take a minute to provide some background as to why it was important for us in Asegurando la Educación to offer something like Aprender Jugando. The project focuses on grades 4 to 12. It's a project that promotes safe learning environments, but mostly focused on 4 to 12. And while we typically focus on schools, as a result of the pandemic, obviously, for us, homes is the environment where kids are learning. So that was important as well, to figure out strategies that will help educators and parents keep promoting safe and nurturing spaces for learning. So as you can see from our infographic, I won't go into detail, but I wanted to highlight with the arrows that social emotional learning, well-being, and parental engagement are key strategies of our program. So as the pandemic hit, we started adapting our programs and our curricula to distance learning formats. We launched our SEL program for older kids and teenagers. We adapted the well-being program for educators, but we were not able to offer anything to younger kids, even though it was very important. It was, beyond the scope of our project. But as we saw other projects and the Ministry of Education adapting different programs like literacy or reading, we noticed the lack of social emotional learning and well-being, and heavy emphasis on academic content. And so we were hearing a lot of feedback from teachers on the pressure that both educators and children were experiencing. And so we thought we should be doing something about it, and USAID was in agreement. So next slide, please. So it was during one of INEE's earliest webinars related to COVID-19 back in April, when I heard Andrea Diaz Varela, who's a colleague in the INEE, one of the INEE working groups, presenting the work of Right to Play Global and how it was being adapted to various contexts and languages. But they didn't have anything in Spanish yet. So Right to Play was very kind to let us use the resource, adapt it, and use it for educational purposes in Honduras under our project. And so we're very lucky to have a packet of games that was already designed. It had a framework. I'll talk about the framework in a little bit. And so the webinar was in April. That was an INEE webinar. So, just to highlight the importance of sharing resources like this and best practices. And by mid-May, we had our own package. It was important for us in the project because we're able to offer something to children and parents and educators, but also to have a learning tool that will help us keep advocating with the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders in Honduras to keep prioritizing learning, playing, SEL, well-being, and the learning through play approach as a priorities during confinement, and not only academic skills. So that was important to say, here's something that can be used, and why this is important. So the adaptations, part of the adaptations include obviously translation, giving a local name to the different games, adding a few games. We had about 4 or 5 games, using our own illustrations to reflect local diversities, such as the Mezquito and Garifuna communities. And we were able to offer something, what we estimated to be for children ages between ages 4 and 8. Next slide, please. So here's just an example of one of the simple games at the beginning of the packet, where it's called Virus Catch, or Atrapando al Virus. And so you can see what the adaptation was. In this case, it was mostly translation and the change of illustration. So we didn't have to change the name, or we didn't have to make many more adaptations. But here the point was, to help younger kids especially understand the concepts of distance, right? So what is a safe distance? And so by using, by throwing a ball and using a simple exercise like that, we will help younger kids understand, what is a safe distance. And so parents can refer to the game and say, you remember the distance when I threw the ball. And so the games are simple. The main user is really the parents. At least in our case, that's been the main user are the parents, because children obviously are still not going to school. But many educators are promoting the packet with the families that are part of their education community. It comes with very simple instructions and the questions, the reflection questions that will help kids think about certain issues, or develop a skill, or promote the learning, just as Paul did a great example, you know, helping us reflect and think about the exercise. Obviously, that's part of the core aspect of the games. Next slide, please. So, Right to Play developed this with a framework that includes 5 sections, and you can read those there. Let's stay healthy, active, let's take care of ourselves, let's take care of one another, and let's play with our family. Games include skills and knowledge about health, hygiene, social emotional learning, well-being, and a lot of it is focused on healthy interactions with family members. There's always a key message or a skill to be developed, and the key discussion questions or reflection questions as I mentioned. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we have to do is a better, a closer monitoring and understanding of how we can now build off of this packet and create something else, or improve it, expand it, complement it. It's been widely disseminated by the project with hundreds of schools and other projects in USAID, Honduras, and by the Ministry of Education, so that was important. But we have it because our priority was to make it accessible for people. We didn't put any restrictions into register when you download or things like that, so we could keep track of how many users. So that was an efficiency, but at that point we thought the best thing would be to make it accessible. We even make it by chapter. We broke it down by chapters or by sections, so we could more easily share it via WhatsApp. So we've tested it and we've tried to do a focus, some focus groups and questions with parents, but particularly, and what they're saying. I mean, there's like 4 things primarily they're highlighting. The benefits of bringing family together, especially at a time when there's conflict arising. It's obviously alternative and fun learning activities. So it can be sometimes a fun activity, but it's not always a learning activity. So that was something that was highlighted. The importance of the focus on well-being. Many families and parents or caregivers highlighted the importance of the focus on the well-being for the child, which has an impact on the well-being of the rest of the family. And keeping kids active, which I know also as a dad, that's an important part. And the last slide. And so I know we're running out of time, so we don't have to play the video. If we have time, we can go back, but that was one of the games, I think it's like 25 seconds. That's one of the games in that section of Let's Play with Our Family. And so that was a mother who actually was playing with the 2 kids, and they were having fun and laughing, and you can see the interaction. And she decided to record that and send it to us as a testament of how much she has enjoyed the packet. So the resource is download. You can go to the next slide. The resource is downloadable here. I'll put it in the chat box, and please just feel free to use it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. The presentation, as the others, just showing the real importance of learning through play at all times, but particularly during the global pandemic. So a huge thanks for sharing this work. And also, we always say that INEE exists because of and for its members, and really great to see the linkages with other work colleagues are sharing on the webinars, and adapting and making relevant for different contexts. So huge thanks to you for sharing this example. I won't speak for long. I'll try and hand over. We'll try and set the video up for the end of the webinar and play that then. But I'd just like to quickly hand over to Lawrence, who joins us from Right to Play, to share the work he's been doing in Ghana with teachers. Thanks, Lawrence.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon from Ghana. And I want to say thank you to earlier speakers. Just to share with you our experience with integrating play during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, prior to we recording our first case of COVID-19, which actually was on the 12th of March, Right to Play basically have been with our usual business, training, engaging teachers, with the support of district officials, to integrate play in their lesson delivery in class. And this we were doing in about 5 regions in Ghana under the Gender Responsive Education Transformation Project funded by the Canadian agency. The basic thing was established on our COT, which is the Continuum of Teacher Training, which is grounded on 5 basic principles. And these principles basically are it's actually continuous. We engage teachers continuously. It is play-based, it is creative autonomy, where teachers have to create their own games using the few things that they have around them, and delivered in partnership with the district education officials, as well as making sure that whatever game that we share is within the context of our environment. We were also preparing to actually scale up the use of play to about 10,000 schools, thanks to Lego Foundation, to about 10,000 schools across the country. Now, following the outbreak of the pandemic, like I said in March, we needed to reach out to the children. Most of these children who are home because schools were closed, they don't have access to any form of education, especially most of them living in rural areas. We had to weigh the options and realize that the way we could engage these children was basically to leverage on the availability of the teachers who are already in the communities. And so first was to adapt our existing manuals, our game manuals, and then also to make them easy for the teachers to actually use, and then also to provide protective equipment, nose masks and sanitizers for these teachers, and then subsequently running training for them to be able to use these manuals. Now, what these teachers did was to go to the communities where they live and engage with the children. First and foremost, to provide them some health and psychosocial support, because already there were a lot of misinformation in the system. And so there was the need to actually make sure that the children are staying healthy. And once they are healthy, we can continue learning. And so these teachers also, subsequent to the games, they play with them to keep them active. They also engage them with supplemental learning in literacy and numeracy. And this, we provided materials that actually supported these activities. In addition to this, we were also engaging and providing some materials to the children. They had some reading materials that they are supposed to use, and these materials are basically going to be delivered by the teachers, and we provided, again, some credit or data support to the teachers so that they could reach out to the children from home, because we wanted to avoid contacting with the children as much as possible. And so after their first or second visits, they could reach out to the parents, they could talk to them, they could really find out if there are referral supports that they need to provide to these children. Next slide, please. Now, we actually also realized that in as much as we were doing our bit in the districts where we work, and there was also the government intervention of running a television program, there was also the challenge with the number of people who have access to television in Ghana. For instance, in Ghana, we have just about 45% of the households who have television. And so we needed to leverage on radio, which had about 62%. And so Right to Play joined similar organizations like USAID, FHI, UNICEF, Lively Minds, to actually partner government to institute or actually run the radio program. Now, our key role was to integrate play. We supported these organizations by making sure that the scripts that are delivered aligns with the 5 characteristics of play by Lego, as presented earlier in this particular call. We also ensured that the distribution of the materials, especially the worksheets, because children were provided, about 2.1 million children were provided with worksheets. And so to be able to support the distribution, Right to Play supported in getting these materials to the children. But then there was this unique problem that we needed to address, because quite a number of the children could not access some of the radio stations we were using. And these, like I said, particularly were children who were in far-reach areas. And so we leveraged again on our teachers who were already on the field and who are still there engaging the children in their homes to actually support children to read and use these worksheets that have been delivered. For those who have access to the radio, the teacher's responsibility is to gather the children whilst obeying the protocols and make sure that these children listen to the radio, they do the activities together, because the challenge again was that most parents couldn't support their children, most of them by way of their business, their work, or they basically do not have the skills that will be able to do this. And so we leverage on our teachers who actually did this, and they are still in the field and supporting with whatever they have to do. In addition to this, activities that have been going on is to make sure that the children, like I said earlier, are safe, they are learning through play, parents are getting motivated to also support home learning. And for us, it was good news to see for the first time homes where parents hitherto would not want to be interested in what their children learn, for the first time getting involved in what their children are learning. They were active, they will be seen active, they calling teachers and finding out what should I do. They calling the teachers and asking, I have finished my work, where do I send it? And for us, this is where the joy to see parents coming. And counting on the radio, which has actually reached up more than 1 million children, the one-on-one engagement by the teachers have already reached about 3,500 children and about more than 2,000 adults. And we hope to get this going in the coming days, because schools are still closed and children are home. For us, this is what we've been doing by way of integrating play and making sure that children who are still at home are enjoying the best of life and at the same time learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Yeah, really appreciate hearing your work. In fact, we had a few questions about support to teachers and working with ministries. So really, really appreciate you touching on these points for us today. Thank you so much. We are a little tight for time today, so I'm going to quickly hand over to our last panelist for our last presentation. So Brian, we welcome Brian here from Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow. Over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks very much. So my name is Brian McCormack and I'm the founder of the Paris-based NGO Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. We're a global psychosocial support, children's rights and peace building, capacity building education organization. And we use learning through play approach that has been researched and developed for over 3 years now, designed specifically for refugee children and youth and populations in emergency. But to begin my talk, I'd like to do a short exercise that everyone can do, fellow speakers and the audience. So if you have some paper and colored pens in front of you, please get ready to use them. And if you don't, you can do this through your imagination in your mind's eye. What I would like you to do is to try to visualize your past. By this, I mean, imagine an image that represents you, your life in the past, and that you would like to communicate. This can be an image of you as a child, your school, your family, maybe a holiday or a special occasion. And if you could just begin now, as we're extremely short on time, if you could start to do this now, either through drawing or through imagining it. And it can be anything. It can be you playing a sport, football, riding a bike. There's no limit. Your imagination is the only limit. So what I would like you to do is to just communicate something visually that you want to communicate to us, your voice of something from your past. And as we're like really running out of time, it's really short. This is something that we do, this is a shorter version of what we do in a much longer workshop that lasts all day long. So if you could just kind of finish up whatever you've been doing and just have a look at it, think about what this represents to you. Why did you want to visualize this? And why is this image and a very important image of your life in the past? And now I'd like to show you a slide. If you could get the slide. Yeah, I think it's coming. And so this slide is a drawing of a past life of a young girl. This image was drawn by a 9-year-old Iraqi girl living in Mixalist refugee camp in Belgrade in Serbia. It's an extremely graphic and strong drawing. that represents a moment of her past life that she wished to communicate, her voice expressing her life. Now, I would like you all to take a second and compare your drawing, your visualization of your past, with this girl's drawing, what she wanted to communicate about her past. This drawing is part of Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow's visual language. It's a database made up of thousands of drawings created by several thousand refugee children, youth, and adults, ages 3 years old to 70 years old, from more than 60 nationalities. We've collected these drawings as part of our PSS workshops that we've conducted in more than 40 refugee camps, centers, and squats across Europe and North Africa. And in these workshops, we invite the participants to do 3 drawings of their lives in 3 basic tenses: the past, the present, and the future. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. These drawings are the YTT visual language, and it is this language which is the base of all our PSS, children's rights, peace and capacity building learning through play education programs. Our research team consists of development psychologists, educational scientists, teachers, and researchers. It's led principally by Roma Tre University and Sapienza University in Italy, and by Sheffield Hallam University in the UK. We also have a number of other academic institutions and universities that have helped us in our research. Our programs have been pilot tested in 5 countries, and we've conducted pre and post assessments along with experimental and controlled evaluations with several hundred children ages 9 to 12 years old. Our results scientifically prove that our approach removes all forms of innate prejudice. And as many of you, I think, are aware, prejudice and discrimination are extremely present toxic features within refugee settlements and emergency situations in general. To our knowledge, there's no other education approach that can do this. Currently, this program, one of our programs, is part of the curricula for dozens of state primary schools in Italy. And all of this research has led us to develop a unique learning through play approach. The children participants are firstly invited, as we very briefly did today, to visualize their lives in 3 tenses. This is a basic PSS art therapy technique that we've created to give voice and communicate about oneself. Then they're introduced to other refugee drawings taken from our database. These drawings will be of similar age, gender, and ethnic background to the participants' drawings. They will also represent specific pictorial elements, such as images of school, equality, friendship, sharing. This helps us to introduce certain topics decided in advance, like education, human rights, peace building, capacity building skills, etc. After that, we introduce a number of creativity drawing activities around identity. And finally, we introduce our performance free-form play activities. These performance activities have been developed through Augusto Boal's image theater techniques, where children have the possibilities to visualize their past, present, and future drawings in a free-form play performance technique that we've created. Our approach, which also includes evaluation phases, is designed into easy-to-use step-by-step downloadable toolkits, specifically developed to be instructed by locally based instructors who are living within the communities and settlements and locations that we want to serve. These programs, toolkits, are tailor-made for specific populations and developed, very importantly, to be piloted by people with absolutely no teaching nor PSS experience. To have a maximum of reach, we all know that in many cases within emergency situations, the volunteers or the local community-based instructors don't necessarily have a lot of teaching experience, and all our programs are designed specifically for that. And as I'm sure you're aware, learning through play programs and activities very often include proximity and close contact between the children participating and between the instructor and the children as well. All our programs are designed within the WHO protocols for COVID-19. 1 meter distance between each participant, wash and protection protocols between each activity, and all our programs can be instructed in both indoor and outdoor settings. So the goal behind all of this last 3.5 years of research has been so that we can have the capacity to reach refugee children and in emergency situations around the world and during this pandemic through locally based instructors. I think I've been quite quick. Maybe that's a lot of information, I don't know. Finally, probably I've been too long, but I would like to thank Rachel, Sarah, and Charlotte from the INEE, Paul from LEGO Foundation, and my fellow speakers. I think that's about it. Any more info you can get on www.yttassociation.org. That's it. I'm in time, I think. No?
You are, definitely. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you cutting off a few minutes for us there for the Q&A. Thank you so much. Really powerful way to finish the presentations. And yes, we've put the link to the website in the chat there, so I encourage everyone to take a look. Thanks to all of the panelists. We have had some brilliant questions coming in throughout the webinar today, and we would like to spend the next 20 minutes or so discussing those. So I would now invite all of our panelists to put their video back on if you are able with your connectivity. And Rachel, we can stop sharing the screen. There we go, fantastic. Great, okay. So if others want to put their video on, we'll get ready for the Q&A. Fantastic, thank you so much. Okay, so we've had lots of questions coming in. I'm going to probably take answers from just one or two of you so we can try and get through as many as we can here today. The first question has been around some conceptions around resources and really recognising in education in emergencies we're often working in low resource settings. So I just wondered if anyone would speak to how we can do play-based approaches, but not requiring lots of resources, whether that's technology or just resources in the home. Would anyone like to chat more about this work in low resource contexts? Anyone want to jump in? Very wondering if it's my sound and I can't hear you. But anyone just want to comment on doing these approaches in very low resource settings?
Well,
Paul,
I can start. Yeah, I can start. And I would really love to hear from people who are doing this work every day. So please don't be shy because people really want to learn from you all. But I know that here at the Foundation, we've been working on some different types of tools that are available that don't require many resources, and where you can use materials that exist in marketplaces or that come from things like old cardboard boxes or other types of material that often doesn't get used that we sometimes think that can be thrown away. There are so many things that you can do, and there's a variety of different resources that we have on our website. And often it doesn't even include, you don't even need actual materials themselves. It's different ways of interacting with others. But I would love to hear from the experts on this call who actually do that on a daily basis. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. I don't know if Khadija. Oh yes, Brian, please do jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just like to say our whole approach is just pens, colored pens and paper and the physical body. So in terms of resources, it's fairly easy to find. So I think that's it.
Great. Yeah, great. No, so we can sort of challenge this misconception that perhaps these activities are resource heavy, and perhaps the exact opposite actually. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Well, if others do have ideas, please do jump in. But if not, I'll move to the next question, which is, we've had quite a few questions around assessment and measurement. One of our attendees asked for ideas around impact evaluation. Quantifying these things can be tricky. Questions around sort of measuring learning outcomes, tracking development when it comes to learning through play. Julia and Khadija, this actually came up during your presentation, so I wonder if I could put you on the spot and ask if for any reflections around this sort of measurement and evaluation piece.
Yeah, Khadija may be able to add more. I know she's working closely with our monitoring team, but one of the questions I noticed in the Q&A that I addressed was that whether we could do a pre and post, and we couldn't, given the nature of the situation, we couldn't do any type of pre and post to see what's happening with the materials. But we did some user testing, some very basic user testing before we sent things to be finalized. Because we also still couldn't really access a lot of clients, what we were able to do was share the materials with our staff across the 3 countries and ask them to share with their families and give us feedback. We did this quite systematically with the support of the Behavioral Insights team, one of our partners on the project. And that was helpful for a first stab. Now we're doing follow-ups using the information we're collecting as we distribute packets to be able to follow up with users to learn for future revisions. And I can leave it to Khadija maybe if she can say something more specifically about what that looks like in reality, because the logistics of trying to do remote user testing, monitoring, follow-up, it's no small feat these days.
Thank you, Julia. I'll just add a bit about what is happening in practice. At the onset of the intervention, we go through a mapping process. It's really something based on the working with the structures that we already have to understand who is going to be potentially benefiting from these resources. And these now give us the base on which to identify how the end users are taking on or accommodating these materials. So we have a database that we are building as we plan for the distribution. We work with the volunteers to support us in collecting this information, and we share with this information with our other partner that is helping us establish or follow up after the distribution on how well these materials are being received, whether they are well understood, whether they are really interpreted well. And we are then going to, based on this feedback, to see how we strengthen the materials and probably even improve their access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia and Khadija. I know it's a question that many INEE members are grappling with. The measurement at the moment is being particularly challenging. And certainly at INEE, we did hold a workshop last week to try and develop more technical guidance around this. So we'll definitely keep sharing resources via the INEE website, as it is such a key question. Thanks so much for feeding in there. Our next question, it relates to parents and caregivers, and really just recognises that not all parents and caregivers are used to playing with their children. So it's just open to all the panel on how we engage parents and caregivers and support them to play with their children, particularly if parents are illiterate. Gustavo, I know you had a video to share with us that we'll share at the end, but any reflections from your work about that work with parents and caregivers?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Okay, so I think this is really an issue and which is really of interest to us. So what we did is basically to get the parents to be part. We first and foremost have to make the teachers we are using, get to engage the parents. And in our locality, one thing that works well is when you have a proper community entry, where you engage the community leaders and then the parents let them understand what you want them to do. And so when teachers finally got into the communities, once they visit homes, we don't do it more like focusing only on the children. Everybody gets involved. And so they are taken through the activity and they are encouraged to do more of those activities with their children at home. And so it was something more like a training or a sensitization we did for parents, so that in the absence of the teacher, they could do something. and at the same time, children could also join whatever we were doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. So a really holistic approach, seeing the caregivers, the teachers, parents, community leaders, all stakeholders in this. Thanks. Gustavo, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, just to add, I mean, basically, just like Lawrence, obviously the importance of families, and because as I mentioned during the presentation, for us in the project, parental engagement or caregiver engagement is critical. We wanted to make sure that we had something to offer, and because children are home, obviously, so what we have, this has allowed us to work more closely with what we call the school community committees, which are comprised of teachers, students, and families, and we've been trying to push the packet of games through the committees, but you know, so that's one way, you know, to give parents a tool, as simple as it may be. We didn't want to underestimate the importance of having something that is a little structured and give some guidance and reflection questions. So that was important. That's some of the feedback that we've gotten from parents, is, you know, that it helps. I mean, sometimes, you know, and as a parent, I feel the same way. As you just blog sometimes, and just like, okay, I have a menu of different games where I don't need, you know, a lot of resources. The challenge has been disseminating it to make sure that parents have access to it and can download it, because we did a PDF, low res PDF, but still, so we've been using mostly WhatsApp. It's downloadable from our Google Drive and from the Ministry of Education as well. But that's one of the challenges, and obviously monitoring and evaluation. So we haven't even gotten as far as that, and we recognize that's important to do.
So I'd like to add a little bit in our context here in Tanzania. How can we get caregiver engaged in kids when it comes to learning? One thing we realized, we connected school with play-based learning together. So telling them, caregiver, like, hey, you know, if you play with your kids, if you do this activity with your kids, it will help them do well in school, you know? So that kind of messaging kind of inspire them, and also, you know, motivate them to do play and learn with their kids. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Amani. Yeah, so thinking about sort of the creative communication around these things. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Paul, we have a question for you around how we ensure that the games are engaging for children, and a question asking, what is that spark that ensures games will be played? And when you're designing tools and resources, how do you select one over another? So just great if there are any reflections there about this spark idea.
I think others on this call are so well positioned to answer that question because that's what they do at a daily basis. Like, I know right to play, you know, it's so into that, and I know that what Play Matters is doing is
Maybe I can add a bit more here, picking up from Ubongo, I guess, on the spark. And I think really the critical thing when we're talking about that spark for kids and for young people is just kind of testing it out and seeing, you know, what seems to work for us and what seems like a really good idea. Sometimes it might not work exactly, or they will change it. And then when they change that, that's actually a better way to play. So we try and let kids guide us a lot. And one of the things that's been kind of an exciting learning from this is that, especially for young children, these kind of sparks and prompts to play seem pretty universal. Like something that works in one place with kids really does, you know, seem, as long as you translate it and contextualize it, seem to work for kids in other places, even across, I mean, we've found that some of the play-based learning content we do for very specific communities in Tanzania gets picked up and watched by kids in the Philippines and the USA and other places, and they really connect with that. So that's one exciting thing. You know, just try, if you're stuck at home with a kid, you know, who you're homeschooling while you're trying to figure out some of this play-based learning stuff, I would say that, you know, that's a place to start, even with the children in your own homes. Our team have been doing that a lot. And then making sure that as we develop games or activities to, you know, just test them out and see how kids respond as we go. For the parents and caregivers, I think that's a little, the whole universality doesn't apply as much. And there's quite a lot of geographical difference, but we're finding that, you know, finding that spark for kids, like it's there and it's just about tapping into it. And it often works in very many different places.
Great, thanks Nisha, and thanks for jumping in, Paul. We lost your sound there. But Lawrence, did you want to come in on this idea of the spark as well?
Yeah, sure. I think it's basically sometimes building on the idea of free play. You know, sometimes children themselves, you can build on what they are doing to play with them. You don't really have to come with a design, a structured game. But then within the home, they're dancing, they're playing the beat. And then you can build on that beat. And then bingo, you are there. You have something that will get them busy. And so that is one of the bits we share with parents. Look, you don't have to go through our manuals or resources and just build on what is doing. But make sure at the end of the day, there is learning coming out with whatever activity that the child is engaged in. So this is just my bit to share with what has been shared earlier by Nisha, right?
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, fantastic, all very inspiring. And just I'm conscious that Brian, Julia and Hadija are also on, but their videos aren't on. So all of you, please do come off mute at any time you'd like to share an answer. I'd just like to pick up on your point, Nisha, as actually we have had a question around contextualization, and if you could speak a bit more, Amani or Nisha, about how you take into consideration cultural contexts when you're designing those playful activities, kind of recognizing that balance between sort of these global tools and resources and making them as meaningful and relevant as possible. Could you speak, I know you mentioned that in your answer, could you speak a bit more to it? Contextualization.
Yeah, I think so, and I don't know if Julia or Hadija would have anything to add here, because it's something that you know, in some ways it was difficult to do given the context of COVID and, you know, our inability to get out in the field and travel, but especially for kind of the caregivers, right, the parents, it does seem very important to contextualize both the messaging around play and the activities themselves. So I think a great point that Paul made at the beginning was like, even understanding what does the word play mean. It has actually a very different meaning in different languages and different contexts. So you're not just translating the word play, but you're understanding when I say this word, this is what it means to these people, and using that as a starting place. And then I guess to go back to what Lawrence said, really understanding what is play in people's own context, use that as your starting beat, and then kind of build upon it. So we tried to do that, as Julia had mentioned, you know, talking to staff of families of field staff and country teams. We did a lot of phone interviews, and then we're able to draw on a lot of past research that we had done around kind of play and what does play look like in these different contexts. But yeah, we really learned through this the importance of kind of language within that too. So it's not just about the activities, like the activities are really important, make sure they're locally relevant, have, you know, the material, don't require a lot of other materials, but then also the way we message it and the language we use around it, and what's the kind of framing that's going to work for a caregiver. As Amani said in Tanzania, they just want to know, oh, this is going to make my kid do well in school. Okay, now I am bought in and I want to do it. So yeah, kind of understanding that framing.
Great, thank you so much. And sorry, everyone, we've got so many great questions. Sorry to rush through these. It'd be great to spend hours more together. And just going back to you, Lawrence, we've had a few questions around what the teacher training looks like around play-based learning. Could you just share maybe a couple of reflections on your work with the teachers and what that looks like?
Right, thank you. Basically, we immediately adopted, realizing that most of the teachers were in the communities and it was difficult to meet them. We adopted the online portals. And so we had Zoom, we had Teams. And so we immediately built or put together a WhatsApp group where we were engaging. We also realized that not all teachers will want to go into this. And so we opened it up for volunteers. And so we had quite a number of them. We put them together. And the resource packs we had adapted, we needed to take them through. Already, these are teachers we've been training. And so what we needed to do was to find a way of getting them ready to be able to get into the community. Another way we did was also to have a pre-recorded video. And so we had a facilitator who was actually recorded. And so he took everybody through. And so once you watch the video, there are steps you need to follow and practice. And then during the face-to-face engagement on the Zoom platform, they perform or they do some of these activities and also post their videos. And so we're just exploring every available media that we can use to make sure that the teachers are just ready to go. And really, it really pay off, because quite a number of them still really immediately as we speak, there are quite a lot of them still in the communities and engaging with families.
Great, thank you so much, Lawrence. Yeah, really creative, coming at it from lots of different angles. Really appreciate your response. Thank you so much. We've had a question that has come up again a few times around adapting play-based learning materials to support and engage children with disabilities or special learning needs. And I just wondered if any of you could speak to that. Julia, Hadija, please feel free to come off mute if it would be okay to hear from you on that one.
Charlotte, I would say this is a recognized area of need. I think consideration is being given in terms of how this can be accommodated, but of course recognizing that also it is a very specialized area of work that might require deeper thinking around how to do this. I think what we've had in the different interactions we've had about this theme is really saying, as much as possible, we encourage integration where we can, but in specific aspects, we might want to look more concretely around how play can be a therapy, how play can be used for, we've had some experiences from different agencies that are trying to work with children who are not only disabled, but also having other difficulties. For example, our partner, Watch Child Holland, is working with children, supporting psychosocial, giving psychosocial support. These are children who are very stressed and might be having very extreme difficulties. So it's looking at how play can come in as a means to really help children communicate, express themselves, and be able to use the same mechanisms to actually support them by giving them counseling and support as needed. So that's kind of how we are approaching it, but we do recognize that it is an area of need, and I think concerted effort is still required to really get this going. Those would be my observations. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, no, thank you, Hadija. Great observations. Such important area of work. So thank you for sharing that. I'm really conscious of time, but we are in discussions with Humanity and Inclusion and colleagues at UNESCO about a follow-up webinar around disability inclusion specifically. So we'll share information on that with colleagues very soon. Sadly, we're at time. We still have some great questions. I will follow up with our wonderful panelists and get further information, and perhaps we can ask some of them to write some blogs for us as well, because such important work happening on this topic, and I know our membership is keen to hear more. I just want to say a huge thanks to all of you. It's been an inspiring discussion, and we'll make sure we share the recording and all of the resources that were mentioned today as much as we can on the INEE website and via email as well with the attendees. So thanks for joining. Just to flag that next week we will have a webinar focusing on COVID-19, education in emergencies and the arts. So very much connected to today's discussion, and particularly the work that Brian shared so powerfully towards the end of the presentations as well. So do look out for details on that webinar. But I'm conscious we're at time, and I know you're all incredibly busy. So I'll just close us there with huge thanks to our participants and our panelists for sharing their work, their ideas in these challenging times. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Everyone.